The pager went off at 11:40 at night, and I already knew before I answered it that the job would be the kind nobody else wanted. Private duty, Ashworth Estate, the agency dispatcher said. Overnight critical care. They've gone through 4 nurses in 5 days. What happened to them? Family, she said. Like that explained everything. By the time I understood what she meant, I was already standing in a marble foyer big enough to hold my entire apartment building, being looked at the way people look at a stain they can't quite place. The woman doing the looking had a face built for boardrooms and a voice built for firing people. "You're the replacement," she said, not a question. "Dorothea Ashworth. You'll address me as Mrs. Ashworth. My daughter is upstairs. Try not to make yourself memorable." I did not tell her that memorable was the only thing I had ever managed to be for the wrong reasons, that 11 months ago a hospital review board had decided an 81-year-old man's death was my fault for a doctor's dosage error, and that every hospital in the county had quietly stopped returning my calls since. I did not tell her that I had $312 in my checking account, and a mother's aneurysm I still, 14 years later, replayed every time a patient's pupils looked wrong. I said, "I'll try," and followed her up the stairs. The room they put me in smelled like antiseptic laid over something else, something colder, cedar smoke, and struck copper, faint under the sterility. The kind of scent that didn't belong to a hospital bed, but to a woman who'd once filled every room she walked into. The woman in the bed didn't look like she filled anything. 34 years old, according to the chart. Sabine Ashworth, CEO of Ashworth Maritime, though you would never have guessed it from the stillness of her, the tube taped along her jaw, the monitor charting a heartbeat too slow and too even, like something being kept alive out of habit rather than hope. The staff downstairs called her the Ashworth ghost when they thought no one who mattered was listening. Feared, ruthless, untouchable, now she was none of those things. Now she was just a body the family had already started grieving in advance, and being efficient about it. A man in a suit that cost more than my rent leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me the way you'd watch a stray dog that had wandered somewhere it shouldn't. "Julian Ashworth," he said. "Her brother. I hope you're not the sentimental type. I'm the type that reads a chart before I form opinions. Read this one then. Massive stroke. No meaningful brain activity in 9 days. We're not monkeying about here for a miracle, sweetheart. We're paying for comfort care until the family can, in good conscience, let her go." He smiled, and it didn't reach anywhere close to his eyes. "She's already gone. Save your tears for someone who matters." I didn't answer him. I had learned a long time ago that the people who said things like that wanted you to argue, wanted the fight, fed on it. I waited until he left, and then I sat down in the chair beside the bed and did what I always did on a first night. I read the numbers instead of the room. Her pupils were unequal. Barely, a millimeter, maybe less, the kind of thing an exhausted attending glances past on hour 14 of a shift. But I had spent 3 years learning to see the millimeter that mattered, ever since I'd watched a doctor glance past the exact same thing in my mother and call it a migraine. I made a note. I told myself it was nothing. I did not believe myself. At 2 a.m, with the house asleep and the monitor beeping its slow, patient rhythm, I picked up her hand, cool, unresponsive, a stranger's hand, and said the thing I say to every patient whose family has already started planning the funeral in the next room, because someone has to say it even if it only reaches the part of a person that still listens in the dark. "I'm not leaving," I told her. "Whatever they've decided out there, I haven't decided anything yet." The monitor didn't change. But something in the room did, some small pressure lifting off my chest that I couldn't have explained to anyone who asked. On the nightstand, I found a child's leftover art project, a paper boat folded from a torn page of a shipping manifest, half crushed under a water glass. I don't know why I straightened it. I set it upright, prow toward the window. The way you point a boat toward open water instead of a wall, and I told myself I would ask about it in the morning. I didn't get the chance. At 6 a.m., Dorothea Ashworth came in with a folder and a lawyer and told me that in 72 hours, barring a miracle no one in this house was expecting, they would be discontinuing extraordinary measures. She did not ask my opinion. She did not need to. I was the replacement, and replacements did not get opinions. I signed the shift log. I looked at the small paper boat on the nightstand, righted against the glass, and under my breath, where only the machines could hear me, I made a promise I had absolutely no right to make. The pupil asymmetry wasn't the only thing wrong. It took me 2 more nights to be sure, because being sure meant staying awake through hours I wasn't paid for, cross-referencing symptoms against textbooks on my phone with the brightness turned down so the night shift wouldn't see. A stroke didn't explain the intermittent tremor in her left hand. It didn't explain why her heart rate spiked exactly 40 minutes after each dose of her maintenance medication instead of settling. It didn't explain the faint blue tint under her nail beds that the attending physician, a soft, unbothered man named Dr. Ferris, waved off as circulation. "You're a private duty nurse," he told me, the 3rd time I raised it, in the tone people use for children and dogs. "I appreciate the diligence, but I've been treating strokes for 20 years. Have you treated aconite poisoning?" He blinked. "That's not. Where would you even get a theory like that?" From a woman who died of a misdiagnosis and a nurse who swore she'd never miss one again. I didn't say. Instead, I asked him to order a full toxicology panel, and when he refused, I called an old classmate who owed me a favor and asked her to run one off the books on a blood sample I was not, strictly speaking, authorized to take. That was the night everything went wrong the ordinary way and right in a way I hadn't expected. It was 3:14 in the morning. I remember the exact time, because I have spent my whole life being the kind of person who counts. When her oxygen saturation dropped so fast, the monitor's alarm didn't so much sound as scream. I hit the call button and didn't wait for an answer. Her airway had partially obstructed. The tube had shifted in her sleep. In the stillness, no one had checked closely enough in 6 hours. I had 90 seconds, maybe less, before it became the kind of 90 seconds you don't come back from. I didn't think. I repositioned her, cleared the airway, bagged her by hand when the ventilator alarm kept faulting, counted breaths out loud into the empty room like an incantation. 1, 2, 3, until her numbers climbed back out of the red and her chest started rising on its own again. By the time Dr. Ferris arrived, bathrobe half-tied, it was over. By the time the head of household security arrived, a broad, silent man named Rook, who had the specific stillness of someone who had seen violence up close and decided he preferred quiet, it was over too. He looked at the monitor. He looked at me. He looked at the bag valve mask still in my hand. "You did that alone," he said. Not a question. There wasn't time to wait for someone else to. He didn't say anything else that night. But when I bent to adjust her pillow afterward, close enough to catch the scent under the antiseptic cedar smoke, struck copper. Something colder and more particular than any hospital could manufacture. I felt him watching, recalculating something behind his eyes. He came back the next evening with a keycard. "Med Suite access," he said. "Family doesn't need to know you have it. It was the first door in that house that opened for me instead of closing." The medical wing at the top of the east stairs looked like a hospital had been reimagined by someone who'd never had to sit in a waiting room. Floors the color of low tide, a private balcony no one used, a chart table stocked with equipment my last 3 hospitals hadn't been able to afford. I thought of my studio apartment, the one with the radiator that only worked if you hit it, and understood for the first time in my life what the word gap actually meant when you put a number in front of it. The staff who weren't rook treated me like furniture that occasionally needed dusting. A housekeeper named Priya was the exception. She smuggled me coffee, told me which hallways to avoid at which hours, and mentioned, almost offhand, that Miss Sabine used to bring her tea every December before the accident, the good kind, loose leaf, because she remembered Priya complaining once about the cheap bags in the staff kitchen. She notices things, Priya said. Noticed. I don't know which word to use anymore. I started noticing things too. A locked drawer in the study that Julian visited with unusual frequency, a boardroom vote scheduled for 3 weeks out, an emergency measure, the paperwork called it, to appoint an interim CEO in the event of continued incapacity. Dorothea's signature on half of it. I didn't understand yet what I was looking at. I understood enough to keep looking. At night, I kept the same ritual. I made myself a cup of chamomile with too much honey, the way I'd made it since nursing school, since 3 a.m. shifts required at least one small sweetness to survive on, and I sat with her hand in mine and talked. Not about the toxicology results, not yet, about nothing, about the leaking radiator in my apartment, about a lullaby my mother used to hum about a boat coming home from the water, about a clinic I used to imagine opening someday in the town I grew up in. Small, cheap, the kind of place that would have caught what killed her before it killed her. I don't know why I told a comatose woman my whole unspoken life. Maybe because she couldn't repeat it to anyone who'd use it against me. Maybe because some nights the only company left in the world is a stranger who can't leave. Her hand was cool under mine, unresponsive, and then, once, only once, so faint I told myself I'd imagined it, her fingers pressed against my palm. Not a squeeze, a pressure. Gone before I could be certain it had happened at all. I didn't get to chase the feeling. 2 days later, Dorothea summoned me to her office, a room with a view of the harbor and not one photograph of her daughter in it, and slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was more money than I'd made in the last 4 months combined. A generous severance, she said, for your discretion. My daughter's condition is a family matter. I'd hate for outside opinions to complicate it. I haven't offered any outside opinions. You've offered a great many looks, Miss Calloway. I notice looks. She smiled the way people smile when they already know they've won. Take the money. Julian has already spoken to your agency about your history. It would be a shame if that conversation continued. I left the envelope on her desk and walked out with my pulse in my ears, understanding for the first time exactly how much I stood to lose, and exactly how little that changed what I intended to do. The lab results came back on a Tuesday, forwarded to my personal email with a subject line that just said, "Call me." Aconitine, a cardiac toxin, plant-derived, notoriously mistaken for stroke in the first critical hours because it mimics one so precisely. Irregular rhythm, altered consciousness. The exact profile sitting in Sabine Ashworth's chart under a diagnosis nobody had thought to question, because nobody with power in that house wanted it questioned. I sat with that knowledge for 1 entire day before I understood what else it meant. I'd assumed, foolishly, that I was fighting negligence, a family too grief-numb or too impatient to look closer. That night, working late in the med suite under the excuse of restocking supplies, I found the emergency shareholder resolution again, the one with the 3-week deadline, and beside it, tucked into a folder Julian had left carelessly on the printer, a memo from an outside physician recommending Sabine be transferred to a specialized long-term facility the moment the family authorized it. The facility was owned, 3 shell companies deep, by Julian himself. They hadn't just let this happen, someone had made it happen, and now they were racing a calendar to make sure it stayed happened before their sister could wake up and ask questions. I stood in that cold, beautiful room with the printout shaking in my hand and understood, all at once, that I was not a nurse defending a patient's dignity anymore. I was the only witness standing between a woman and the people who wanted her dead, and not one person in this house who had power would believe a private duty nurse with a blacklisted name over the family that owned the building. I thought about walking away. I thought about the envelope still sitting on Dorothea's desk. Then I thought about a paper boat someone had folded and left, unfinished, on a dying woman's nightstand, and about the fact that no one else in this entire mansion had bothered to straighten it. I put the printout in my bag. My hands didn't stop shaking. Not that night, not for 3 more nights after. But I stopped waiting for someone braver than me to do something about it. The night it nearly ended, I was the only one in the room, which was, I would later understand, exactly the point. Dr. Ferris authorized an increase in comfort medication at Dorothea's request, delivered by an on-call nurse I'd never seen before, who left without meeting my eyes. I checked the new bag out of habit before hanging it, the way I check everything, and found the concentration wrong, not comfort care wrong, catastrophic wrong, a dose that wouldn't ease a dying woman's pain so much as guarantee she stopped needing any. I didn't call anyone. There wasn't time, and I no longer trusted anyone in that house to answer honestly if I did. I pulled the line myself, flushed the port, and when her breathing faltered from the dose already circulating, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I bagged her by hand, counting seconds out loud into the dark, 41, 42, 43, willing her lungs to remember the rhythm on their own. I'm not leaving, I told her, the promise from the first night, worn smooth now from repetition. Do you hear me? I'm not leaving you to them. I don't know how long I sat like that, counting, bargaining, with a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. I know that somewhere in the counting, her fingers moved against mine again. Not a flicker this time, a grip. Weak and uncoordinated, but unmistakably a grip. And I know that later, much later, she would tell me she had heard every single number. She had been in there the whole time. Not gone, not absent, but locked somewhere behind the stillness, aware in broken fragments of voices and hands, and a particular ritual smell of chamomile and too much honey that had, against all reasonable explanation, become the only thing that felt like safety. She heard her mother's visits and felt nothing warm in them. She heard Julian's and felt something close to dread. And every night, for 9 days, she heard a stranger promise not to leave, and held on to that promise the way you hold on to a rope you can't see the other end of. I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew at dawn, watching her oxygen levels climb back into a livable range, was that her eyelids had started to flutter, that her hand hadn't let go of mine even in sleep, and that somewhere down the hall a door had opened that none of us could close again. It took 4 more days for her to hold a full sentence together, and when she finally did, it wasn't the question I expected. Who, she said, voice wrecked from disuse, eyes barely tracking, keeps humming. That would be me. Sorry, bad habit. Don't, she said. Stop apologizing. Keep humming. I told her, over the slow architecture of those first waking days, everything I hadn't told anyone in years, about my mother, about the missed aneurysm, about the old man whose death had cost me my career and my name in every hospital within 100 miles, about a clinic that existed only in the part of my mind where I still let myself want things. She listened the way people listen, when listening is the only physical act still available to them, and when she was strong enough to talk back, she gave me pieces of herself in return. Careful, exact, like a woman unused to handing anything away for free. Her mother had raised her on a single doctrine, that love was a liability, that the company would outlive every person who ever claimed to care about her, that softness was how you ended up dead in a boardroom instead of a bed. Her father had died believing it. She had spent 15 years proving it, becoming the Ashworth ghost, becoming untouchable, until untouchable turned out to mean exactly what it sounded like. Alone, in a bed, with a family already dividing her company before her body was cold. "I heard you," she said, on the 6th day, when her hand was steady enough to hold mine on purpose instead of by reflex. "Every night. I couldn't move, I couldn't answer, but I heard you tell me you weren't leaving." I built the rest of my mind around that sentence. It was the only true thing anyone said to me in 9 days. It's still true. I know. Her thumb moved once against my palm, deliberate this time, unmistakable, that terrifies me more than the poison did. I laughed, surprised into it, and she almost smiled, the first almost smile I'd seen from her, small and unpracticed, like a language she was relearning. Under the antiseptic, her scent had started to change, warming at the edges, cedar smoke and copper, softened by something that hadn't been there in the sickroom stillness. I didn't have a name for it yet. I would later. We were 3 days from her walking unassisted, 4 from a full sentence about anything but us, when Priya knocked with a face gone gray. "Mrs. Ashworth is coming up," she said. "She knows." They didn't waste time once they knew. By that evening, a man I'd never met produced paperwork accusing me of administering unauthorized medication, of tampering with hospital equipment, of accepting money from an outside party to manipulate a vulnerable patient. Every accusation built from the exact things I'd actually done to keep her alive, twisted just enough to make caution look like conspiracy. Rook wasn't in the house that day, sent on an errand I would later learn Julian had invented specifically to get him out of it. Security I'd never seen before walked me to the gate. Sabine, 3 days out from full mobility, wasn't strong enough yet to stop it. I heard her voice through the closed door of the room, hoarse and furious, telling them to wait, telling them I hadn't done anything. And I heard her mother's voice answer, smooth as poured glass, "She's confused you, darling. It happens with medication like this." We found the payments in the nurse's account ourselves. A lie total enough that I understood, standing on the wrong side of that door, that they had planned for this exact contingency long before Sabine ever opened her eyes. I didn't cry until I was 3 blocks away, in an alley behind a shuttered laundromat, and even then it wasn't grief. It was the specific, useless fury of having been right about everything and believed by no one who mattered. I stood at the end of the drive as the gate closed, the same gate I'd walked through 9 days earlier as a nobody would miss, and watched an ambulance I hadn't authorized pull around the side of the house, a transfer to specialized long-term care, the paperwork would later say, to the exact facility Julian owned 3 shell companies deep. I had spent everything I had keeping her alive long enough to be conscious for her own kidnapping. Rook found me 2 hours later, because Priya had called him the moment the gate closed, because it turned out loyalty in that house didn't run in the direction anyone had assumed. He didn't apologize for being gone. He put a folder on the hood of his car, security footage timestamped to the medication swap, an audio file he'd been quietly recording of Julian's calls for 11 days, evidence I hadn't even known existed of a payment from Julian to the physician who'd first diagnosed the stroke. "I've worked for that family 19 years, he said. "I've never once seen her wait for anyone. Not like she waited for you to come back into that room before they took her." He looked at me the way he'd looked at me the night I saved her life alone, recalculating again. "We're not letting them finish this." Josie met us with the sealed toxicology report, and every favor she'd ever owed me called in at once. We reached the facility at 1:52 in the morning, 40 minutes, Josie's contact told us, before a scheduled final sedation that had never been authorized by any Ashworth board resolution, only by Julian's signature and a doctor on his payroll. Sabine, weak but conscious, heard my voice in the hallway before she saw me, and something in her fought its way upright against every instruction her body was giving her. When the orderly Julian had stationed at her door moved to block us, she was the one who put herself between his raised arm and me, absorbing a blow meant to put me down, staggering but standing, because apparently even half recovered from poisoning, she remembered exactly how to spend herself for someone she'd decided was hers. Rook had him on the ground in 4 seconds. I had my hand fisted in his collar before I understood I meant to hit him myself, and it was Sabine, breathless, blood at her lip, who caught my wrist. "Don't," she said. "Don't become them to stop them." We took the fight out of the room instead. We took it, at dawn, into a boardroom. The emergency shareholder meeting was already in session when we walked in, Sabine on her own feet, refusing the wheelchair, refusing Rook's arm, refusing everything but mine, and the room went silent in the specific way rooms go silent when the dead walk in and ask for the floor. Dorothea recovered first, always the fastest to recover. "This is a private matter. This is my company," Sabine said, and her voice, still rough, still healing, filled that boardroom the way 9 days of silence apparently hadn't managed to erase, and you are both about to hear exactly what you did to keep it. Josie's toxicology report went up on the screen. Rook's audio played next, Julian's own voice discussing dosages, discussing the facility, discussing timelines with a casualness that made half the board look physically ill. I said nothing. I had done my part in rooms no one was filming. This part belonged to her. "She poisoned me," Sabine said, looking at her mother, not raising her voice, "and you let her, because a dead daughter was easier to control than a living one who wouldn't do what you wanted. You'd have let me die in that bed and called it mercy." She turned, found me in the doorway where I'd stayed, unwilling to make this moment about anything but her. "I'm alive because one person in that house refused every reason she was given to walk away. I am not interested in pretending that doesn't matter more to me than any of you ever did." Security, real security, the board's, not Julian's, escorted him out first, and then, with considerably more dignity than she deserved, Dorothea. On his way past me, Julian tried, out of pure reflex spite, one last version of the line he'd opened with, 13 days and a lifetime ago. "She's not gone," I said, before he could finish it. "She never was." I saved my tears for someone who actually matters. He didn't have an answer for that. Neither, for a moment, did the room. When the board had cleared, when the accusations were withdrawn and my name, on Rook's insistence and the footage that proved it, was fully cleared, Sabine found me in the empty boardroom with the morning coming up gray and gold through the harbor-facing windows. "Tell me to stop," she said, closing the distance between us, "and I will. Don't stop." The kiss, when it came, tasted like copper and chamomile both, like two people who had spent 13 days learning each other through walls neither of them had chosen. Later, in a quiet room with the door locked and no family left to interrupt it, she asked me with her own words, plainly, patiently, every step of the way, And I said yes to every one of them before the bite ever landed at the curve of my throat, sharp and then warm, and then something settling into place in my chest that I didn't have a name for either, until I did. Julian was convicted 11 months later of attempted murder and securities fraud. Dorothea, stripped of her shares by a board that no longer feared her, left the harbor city and, as far as anyone bothered to track, never came back. Dr. Ferris lost his license. None of it undid 9 days in a bed, but all of it closed, one by one, every door those three had thought would stay shut behind them. 6 months after that, on a morning with the harbor gone gold under new light, I opened the small clinic I used to describe to a comatose woman as though it were a story instead of a plan, funded, over my loud objections and her louder insistence, by the Ashworth Maritime Foundation, staffed with the kind of nurses nobody else's hospital board would hire twice. Priya runs the front desk. Josie runs the lab. Rook, unofficially, runs security for a 2-room clinic in a town Sabine had never heard of before me, because apparently the Ashworth ghost had decided that was where she wanted to spend her Tuesdays. The proposal happened on the balcony no one had ever used in that house, the one outside the room where I'd first found her, a small box. Unremarkable. Inside a paper boat folded from a page of an old shipping manifest, prow pointed toward open water. "Ask me with your words," I told her, laughing, because it seemed only fair to make her say it after everything I'd said to her when she couldn't answer. "Marry me," she said. "Stay exactly the way you already have. I'm only making it legal." The bonding ceremony was small, harborside, at the hour the light turns the water the color of struck copper. Rook gave the only toast anyone remembers, gruff and brief. 19 years I worked for a woman who never once waited on anyone. I watched her wait 9 days for this one to come back into a room. That's the whole speech. Josie cried and denied it loudly. Priya brought tea, loose leaf, chamomile, with entirely too much honey, because some rituals outlive the rooms that started them. We keep the paper boat on the windowsill of the bedroom that used to be a sick room, prow to the glass, facing the harbor, facing home. Some mornings the light catches it just right, and I think of a stranger's hand closing weakly around mine in the dark. Of a promise made to someone who couldn't answer, kept anyway, because some promises aren't conditional on being believed. I used to think being seen was something that happened to other people, the pretty ones, the easy ones, the ones the world had already decided were worth the trouble. I know better now. Being seen is not about being easy to love. It is about someone staying in the room after everyone who was supposed to love you has already left it, and choosing, on the other side of the worst of it, to stay again. The end.